A German officer discovered 50,000 gallons of U.S. fuel and instantly knew the war for the Reich was over. December 17, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. Hansfeld, Belgium. The massive engine of a Tiger tank gave a final choke, then fell silent. SS Standartenführer Otto Becker slammed his mailed fist against the steel hatch. The sharp sound echoed in the chilling pre-dawn. SFX, loud metallic clang. His driver, Kurt, tried the ignition again. Nothing. The indicator showed dry. Obersturmführer Schultz called down from above, his voice strained with barely suppressed alarm. "Sir, the secondary reserve is also empty." Becker dropped from his lead vehicle, his boots crushing the frosted earth. All around him, the apex armored thrust Germany assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes offensive, sat dead. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of the Wehrmacht's finest Waffen-SS troops, all immobilized by vacuum tanks. Through the haze, Becker saw the recently vacated American position ahead, Hansfeld, a vital supply hub for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Yankees had retreated so fast they left fire still flickering in barrels and coffee steaming in metal mugs. And there, arranged as a gift from the god of battle, stood endless ranks of jerry cans, thousands of the recognizable olive-drab American containers. Becker approached slowly, with a strange reverence. His adjutant, Hauptmann Gruber, forced open one can and inhaled. High-octane American gasoline, pure benzene. His men immediately began the desperate work of refueling their war machines. Becker walked through the cache, counting. The implications were staggering. 50,000 gallons, sufficient to power his entire Kampfgruppe through to the Meuse River. Enough to potentially rewrite the offensive's fate. The Americans had discarded more petroleum in that solitary depot than most German formations received in the last 6 months. Zoom in on Becker's stunned face. Yet as he stood amidst this immense stockpile, watching his soldiers pour Yankee fuel into German engines, a profound dread descended like the morning mist. If the Allies could afford to abandon such treasure, if they could leave behind what the Reich would defend with entire divisions, then this conflict was effectively decided. Germany had not merely misjudged, Germany had fundamentally misunderstood the sheer scope of its adversary. 6 months prior to Becker's find at Hansfeld, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's production czar, had presented the Führer a devastating survey that should have halted all aggressive action immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel creation, the very lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically eradicated by continuous aerial assault. The Lerner Works, which manufactured 175,000 tons in April, managed a meager 5,000 by September. The hydrogenation plants at Politz, Blackhammer, and Brooks were functioning below 10% capacity. The statistics painted a portrait of inevitable collapse. In 1944, the USA manufactured 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, counting all synthetic output and seized Romanian reserves, achieved only 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was trying to sustain mechanized conflict with logistics based on horses. While America flooded its forces with petroleum plenty, Major Friedrich Simon of Wehrmacht Logistics had already projected the Ardennes push would demand 4.5 million gallons just to reach Antwerp. Hitler authorized 5 million, but only half reached the front due to transport woes. The German High Command was gambling the whole operation on seizing enemy supplies, a posture that betrayed terminal weakness, not strength. Meanwhile, the Allies had constructed an oil pipeline across liberated France nicknamed PLUTO, and the Red Ball Express, a colossal truck convoy system delivering 12,500 tons of material every single day to the front. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were expending 1.2 million gallons daily, while receiving 1.4 million. They were actively building reserves while fighting. Otto Becker wasn't naive. At 29, he was among the youngest regimental leaders in the SS, a Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, hardened on the Eastern Front, where he learned that in modern fighting, propellant superseded ammunition. His battle group was designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive concentration for the entire Ardennes drive. On December 14th, just 2 days before the attack, Becker attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was blunt. "You must secure American fuel dumps to reach the Meuse." The fuel allotment for Becker's Kampfgruppe was set to 31,000 gallons, enough for only 50 miles of active combat. The distance to the Meuse River was 65 miles. The blueprint for disaster was inherent in the plan from the start. As his spearhead prepared to move on December 16th, Becker issued ironclad directives. Vehicles would advance in single file to ration fuel, engines off for any stop exceeding 5 minutes. Capturing Allied fuel points was priority 1, above tactical gains. Can you imagine such a grim starting position? The contrast with American readiness was stark. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion, positioned only 20 miles from Becker's start line, noted in his log, "Resupply of fuel received, 8,000 gallons. Third delivery this week. Storage tanks are already full." December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m. The massive artillery barrage that kicked off Operation Watch on the Rhine consumed more ordnance in 2 hours than the entire Wehrmacht had earmarked for previous entire campaigns. Yet even this spectacle masked profound shortages. Becker's column started moving at 7 a.m., immediately lagging. The roads, marked as major arteries on German charts, were tight country tracks, many unpaved. Within hours, gridlock erupted as vehicles optimized for Russian planes struggled through the dense Ardennes forest. At Lanzarote, his initial target, they met unexpected resistance by a single American reconnaissance squad, 18 men who stalled the premier German armored force for nearly 10 hours. During that delay, Becker's vehicles idled, burning vital propellant. When they finally forced their way into Hansfeld at dawn on the 17th, his column had covered 20 miles and burned 40% of its supply. At that velocity, they would run completely dry before reaching the halfway objective. The American supply point at Hansfeld wasn't even a primary installation. It was a forward collection area for the 99th Infantry Division, what the U.S. Army termed a Class 3B depot, a temporary gas station. Yet what Becker found there surpassed the monthly allotment for an entire German panzer division. Hauptmann Gruber later recounted, "We located mountains of jerry cans, each holding 5 gallons of gasoline. They were piled 3 meters high, stretching perhaps 200 meters. The Americans hadn't even bothered to damage them." The recovered fuel was premium aviation grade mixed with motor fuel, 80 octane or higher. German machinery, especially the sensitive Maybach engines in the Tigers, required 74 octane. This superior American gasoline actually caused mechanical failures in several of their vehicles. As Becker's troops refueled, they uncovered further evidence. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann found shipping manifests in the depot office. He could read English from his pre-war import business. The documents showed this fuel traveled from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to England, over the Channel to Normandy, and trucked 400 miles to Hansfeld. The 6,000-mile journey took less than 6 weeks. Hauptmann recalled in a later interview, "I showed the papers to Standartenführer Becker.
He read them twice, then crushed them. He said nothing, but his face drained of color. We both understood the significance.
Private Ernst Karl found a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers, only 2 days old. The lead story celebrated the inauguration of a new pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of flowing 300,000 gallons every day. A single pipe delivering more fuel daily than Becker's whole Kampfgruppe was budgeted for the entire push. To grasp the shock of Becker's revelation, one must appreciate the Reich's fuel status by late 1944. Since May, Allied bombing had slashed synthetic production by 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft due to aviation fuel shortages. Pilot instruction time dropped from 250 flight hours to 60. The German surface navy had essentially ceased deploying. U-boats were fitted with snorkels to stretch their diesel reserves by running on batteries longer. On the home front, civilian car usage stopped completely since 1942. Gasoline was so valuable the Gestapo pursued black market thieves stealing single liters. Farmers reverted to animal-drawn plows. Contrast this with the United States producing 67% of the world's petroleum. The East Texas oil field alone yielded more oil than all of German-held Europe combined. American refineries operated at such a peak that Standard Oil was researching new byproducts purely out of crude surplus. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld, Becker's column surged ahead. They reached Billigen by midday on the 17th, seizing further rations, ammunition, and crucially, documents detailing other U.S. fuel depots nearby. But those documents revealed a chilling fact. The Americans had fuel caches everywhere. Every significant intersection had a supply point. The U.S. First Army alone maintained 3.5 million gallons in reserve. They fight an enemy whose casual waste dwarfs our entire need, Becker pressed on. To Lignaville, the site of the Malmedy atrocity. Even that terrible act was tied to fuel scarcity. Becker later alleged he could not spare gasoline to transport prisoners. By nightfall on the 17th, Becker's vanguard reached Stavelot, home to a major U.S. fuel storage site holding over 2 million gallons. Here was sufficient propellant to guarantee reaching the Meuse. But as the initial German vehicles approached, American engineers were already active. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received advance notice of the German advance. His directive was brutally simple: deny fuel to the enemy at any cost. The Stavelot storage area contained 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline in cans spread over 15 acres. At 4:30 p.m. on the 17th, as Becker's leading elements neared, Captain Brewster issued the command. Engineers spread fuel trails between the stacks. White phosphorus grenades were issued. Technical Sergeant Paul Soles tossed the first grenade. The detonation was instant and overwhelming, he later recalled. A wall of fire shot up maybe 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire facility was an inferno. Becker's lead tanks arrived to confront a plume of black smoke climbing 1,000 feet into the air. The blaze would last 3 days, consuming enough fuel to power Becker's whole division to Antwerp and back. Sturmbannführer Schultz described the moment. The commanding officer stood on his turret watching the flames. He was silent for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he stepped down and told me, "They can afford to torch 2 million gallons just to keep it from us. What are we even doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers were torching supply dumps rather than risk German capture. At Tomen, 1.1 million gallons went up in smoke. At Recht, 2.5 million gallons were deliberately destroyed. In total, U.S. forces intentionally incinerated over 8 million gallons in the first week, far exceeding the fuel allocated for the entire German operation. The capacity to casually destroy millions of gallons stemmed from a supply network beyond German comprehension.
The Red Ball Express had moved 412,000 tons of materiel using 6,000 trucks running non-stop. Each truck consumed 40 gallons daily. The operation itself burned more fuel than Army Group B received in an entire month. By December 1944, the Motor Transport Service employed hundreds of truck companies working on color-coded highways. The system moved 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder, 1st Army's Chief Logistics Officer, logged on December 18th, fuel intake yesterday, 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued, 1,623,000 gallons. Net gain to reserves, 224,000 gallons. The fuel pipeline system was even more astonishing. Operation PLUTO had laid underwater conduits across the channel, pumping 1 million gallons per day from Britain. A massive network of pipes extended inland. The Cherbourg-Paris line delivered 800,000 gallons daily. The Seine line moved 650,000 gallons. By December 1944, Allied armies in Northwest Europe were using 7.5 million gallons every day, while receiving 8.2 million. They were increasing their reserves during active campaigning. As Becker drove deeper into Belgium on the 18th, the hopelessness of the German predicament became apparent. At Schur, they seized another cache, 5,000 gallons, used up in just 3 hours of fighting. Tiger tanks burned 2.5 gallons per mile in combat. Panthers required 1.5 gallons per mile. In the difficult forest terrain, consumption jumped 40%. Hauptmann Dingler, maintenance chief for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, "By midday on December 18th, we had burned 67,000 gallons since the launch. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were running a deficit." American intelligence monitoring German radio traffic via ultra-intercepts knew precisely Becker's fuel status. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units, enemy critically short of fuel, eliminate all gasoline stocks threatened by enemy action. That same day, U.S. C-47 aircraft flew 316 missions delivering supplies to Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of fuel. Americans airlifted more fuel to one besieged town than Becker's entire battle group possessed for the entire operation. By December 19th, as Becker's units clashed near State Vith, the fuel emergency became absolute. Tanks were being abandoned because they were out of gas, not because they were destroyed by enemy fire. Becker consolidated his remaining supply, maybe 8,000 gallons, enough for one final fight or retreat, but never both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were gearing up for January's operations. Brigadier General Morris Gilland requested 245 million gallons for the forthcoming month. The approval was instant. The disparity wasn't just in volume, it was in technological standardization. American vehicles were built for simple efficiency. Sherman tanks burned 0.8 gallons per mile versus the Tiger's 2.5. American trucks achieved 8 miles per gallon fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, repairs were simple. German forces operated a chaotic mixture of captured and native vehicles, each with unique requirements. French tanks needed different oil than German Panthers. Soviet trucks needed parts unavailable for German Opel models. Every difference amplified logistical nightmares. On December 20th, Becker received a radio update. Fuel convoy destroyed by aircraft, no further resupply possible. Becker summoned his commanders. Sturmbannführer Vera Pertka stated plainly, "We have perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 kilometers distant." According to Hauptmann Gruber's notes, the Standartenführer announced, "Gentlemen, we have learned that we are fighting an opponent who destroys more fuel denying it to us than we received for this entire offensive. What we took at Hansfeld, which felt like winning the lottery, was negligible to them. We cannot prevail." This understanding was spreading rapidly. General Hasso von Montefoil, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, later penned, "When I learned Americans burned 8 million gallons rather than risk our seizure, I knew the drive failed before it started." Colonel Friedrich Fonder, captured on the 23rd, told his interrogators, "Your GIs discard chocolate bars. My men haven't seen real chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons. We count by the liter. How can we possibly contend with such excess? We count by the liter. They burn oceans to deny it to us."
The discovery undermined German propaganda concerning American softness. Soldiers had been told Americans lacked resolve. Then they found out the Allies could destroy more than the Reich could produce. By December 21st, Becker was encircled near Ligneville, his tanks silent. The American forces surrounding them, 31st Infantry, 82nd Airborne, 3rd Armored, had a combined fuel budget of 340,000 gallons for December 21st alone. Becker had perhaps 1,000 gallons left. Private First Class Richard McKinley wrote home, "We have Germans pinned down who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes we use more fuel warming coffee than they have for their tanks." The American response demonstrated industrial warfare at its zenith. Patton's Third Army swing north required 350,000 gallons just for the repositioning. Considered impossible by German metrics, yet executed in 3 days. December 23rd brought clear skies. Allied planes flew 2,000 sorties, each consuming fuel at rates that would have grounded the Luftwaffe for weeks. P-47 Thunderbolts burned 300 gallons hourly. B-26 Marauders consumed 200 gallons an hour. 1 day of air operations burned more than Germany's entire offensive fuel budget. On the night of the 23rd into the 24th, Becker abandoned his armor and escaped on foot. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that began the attack, 39 remained functional but stationary. These were destroyed with their remaining ammunition. Oberleutnant Heinz Gülz recounted, "We siphoned the final drops from all vehicles, maybe 200 gallons total. The Standartenführer personally disabled his command vehicle. Millions of Reichsmarks worth of materiel destroyed because the tanks stood empty. Of the 5,000 men who began with Becker's Kampfgruppe, approximately 770 returned. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several dumps, and discovered the grim reality of Allied logistics. News of Becker's findings filtered quickly through the German High Command. On December 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model received reports detailing the captured American materials. His Chief of Staff recorded Model's reaction. The Field Marshal reread the figures twice. 50,000 gallons at Hansfeld, 2 million torched at Stavelot, 8 million ruined rather than seized. He stated, "We are not engaged in the same conflict." Hitler, briefed on the 28th, refused to acknowledge the truth. Speer later wrote, Hitler insisted the documentation was Allied fabrication. When shown photographs of the burning Stavelot depot, he dismissed them as Cinena-tricks. But the lower ranks understood the message. Sergeant Hoffman wrote to his wife, "Yankees clean clothes with gasoline. They give chocolate to their dogs. They fire artillery just for Christmas cheer. We cannot fight against infinity." The psychological impact demolished German narratives of racial superiority. How could the supposedly decadent Americans command such resources while the master race scraped for necessities? At Nuremberg, German leaders consistently cited logistics, especially fuel, as the deciding factor. Field Marshal Keitel testified, "We held tactical superiority from 1940 to 1941. By 1944, we could barely move troops for lack of gas, while Americans maneuvered armies like chess pieces." Colonel Becker, who ordered the Malmedy attack, offered revealing testimony. Every choice after December 17th was dictated by fuel deprivation. We could not chase, attack, or retreat effectively. Americans moved freely, while we meticulously counted every drop.
General Heinz Guderian wrote, "When Becker seized 50,000 gallons, something vital to him but trivial to the Americans, the war was essentially decided." The narrative endures because it marks where industrial capability overtook martial prowess. Conflicts are decided by manufacturing output, not just bravery. Dr. Richard Overy calculated that by 1944, Allied to Axis output ratios surpassed 5-to-1 in major goods. In petroleum, it neared 50-to-1. These gulfs could not be bridged by better training or superior tactics. America gilt 324,750 planes during the war, Germany 119,970. Americans manufactured 88,400 tanks, Germany 46,857. But most decisively, America refined 1.8 billion barrels of oil in 1944 alone, while Germany managed only 33 million. December 24, 1944. As Becker's exhausted troops walked through American lines on foot, leaving 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles behind, the sheer scale became clear. They had captured 50,000 gallons, seemingly a miracle, only to learn it held no meaning for an adversary who could incinerate millions. Sturmbannführer Schulz reflected in 1975, "That morning at Hansfeld, finding American fuel felt like winning the national lottery. By evening, hearing about Stavelot burning, we knew we had already lost. The Americans possessed so much they could destroy what we would willingly perish to possess." That 50,000 gallons was less than a single American armored division burned in 2 days. It was less than the Red Ball Express expended in 3 hours, a negligible figure in Allied daily consumption. Major General J. Lyle Collins later observed, "The Germans' desperate quest for fuel exposed their core error. They assumed we regarded propellant as they did, as precious and finite. They could not comprehend we had enough to torch millions to prevent minor tactical setbacks." Operation Watch on the Rhine failed because of the immutable arithmetic of industrial warfare. The offensive burned 2.8 million gallons, 40% of their total budget, compensated partially by captured stores. During the same time frame, U.S. forces consumed 267 million gallons, nearly 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft, but the most devastating casualty was the loss of operational illusion. Every German soldier witnessing American readiness understood they were not fighting a war, but participating in their own systematic dismantling. Otto Becker survived his captivity until 1956, convicted of war crimes. In 1976, he was fatally shot at his French residence by unknown assailants. But in 1967, he told historian Henry Lehman, "Finding that depot was the worst moment. If we had run dry sooner, we might have retreated with our honor intact. Instead, we learned the Americans commanded oceans while we had mere drops. We understood impossibility." The lesson extends beyond World War II's scope. In modern conflict, supply chains overshadow battlefield maneuvers. Production capacity defeats soldier valor. The German soldier of 1944 was arguably better trained and more experienced. It made no difference. Americans were backed by an industrial apparatus that could squander more than Germany could manufacture. This truth was embedded in every container at Hansfeld, every gallon torched at Stavelot, every pipe stretching across France. Wars between industrial giants are won by factories and refineries, not by brilliant generals. Colonel Trevor Dupuy calculated that in December 1944, each American soldier was supported by 67 pounds of supplies daily, while each German received 3 pounds. Americans griped about waste. Germans would have considered American waste an unimaginable fortune. In 1984, 4 decades after the fighting, veterans gathered at Ligneville. The local museum displays Becker's Tiger, positioned exactly where it ran dry. On December 23, 1944, former Unterscharführer Karl Wortmann stood near the tank with former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry. "We always wondered why you stalled," Anderson commented. "We assumed it was strategic maneuvering." Wortmann laughed bitterly. "We stalled because the tanks were empty. You burned millions just to keep it from us. How could we compete with that?" Anderson paused, then responded, "We honestly never knew you were that desperate. We had so much, we never considered it." That brief exchange captured the reality of December 1944. One side tallied their losses in gallons, the other calculated victories in millions of gallons. One side fought for every last can, the other incinerated oceans. The result was fixed beforehand.
German Army Group B records confirm this. December 16th, offensive launched with 70% of minimum fuel required. December 17th, Becker captures 50,000 gallons. December 18th, multiple depots destroyed, 5 million gallons lost. December 24th, Becker abandons equipment due to fuel depletion. Simultaneously, the First Army reported. December 16th, reserves at 3.7 million gallons. December 18th, 1.8 million added to reserves. December 24th, reserves over 4.1 million gallons. Americans treated millions with casual indifference. Germans hoarded individual containers. Beyond volume, American fuel symbolized technological dominance. U.S. refineries had mastered catalytic cracking, yielding superior octanes more efficiently than German hydrogenation processes. American 100-octane aviation fuel gave their flyers a performance edge over German planes running on lower-grade synthetics. Americans perfected additives Germany could not reproduce, like tetraethyl lead and detergents. German engines, often designed for lower quality, sometimes ran poorly even on captured American supplies. Fuel shortages dictated every soldier's daily existence. Sergeant Hans Müller wrote on December 20th, "Marched 30 kilometers today, no truck fuel to move beyond abandoned American vehicles whose engines were left running for warmth. They leave engines on. We walked through snow." Medical support collapsed. Ambulances could not move the wounded. Hospitals could not power generators. Men perished waiting for transport that never arrived. Dr. Wilhelm Kirsting testified, "We had excellent surgical teams, even captured American medical supplies, but zero fuel for ambulances. Men died who could have been saved with a 10-kilometer trip." The discoveries destroyed Nazi propaganda regarding American weakness. Troops had been told Americans were soft, incapable of real fighting. Then they learned the Allies would willingly destroy more than the Reich could produce. Corporal Geisler's diary, December 28th. Reports indicate severe morale depths. Soldiers are writing home about American superiority, which undermines our entire narrative. But news traveled faster than official censorship allowed. The myth of German military supremacy could not survive direct contact with American logistical might. The failure of the Ardennes meant Germany's only option was a final, desperate defense. General Jodl testified at Nuremberg, "After the Bulge, we all knew the game was up. We played our last high card and discovered the enemy held all the aces." Recognizing German desperation, the Allies intensified bombing of German fuel infrastructure. By February 1945, German fuel production reached zero. The Luftwaffe was permanently grounded. Pilot training ceased. The Wehrmacht became largely immobile, destroyed piecemeal by mobile enemies. Spring 1945 saw bizarre scenes. Entire German formations surrendered due to immobility, not direct combat defeat. Panzer divisions sat helpless as Allied waves drove past them.
General Major Fritz Bohling described, "We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, plenty of ammunition. We possessed 300 liters of fuel, not enough to reach the next village. We destroyed our tanks and walked into captivity." Meanwhile, the American advance was slowed only by traffic jams caused by their own equipment overload. The Third Army alone maintained 15,000 vehicles. Kampfgruppe Becker's fuel crisis perfectly illustrates how industrial capacity sealed World War II's fate. When Becker stood amidst those captured jerry cans that December morning, he grasped the core truth. They fought an opponent whose waste surpassed their need. The statistics confirm everything. German offensive authorization, 5 million gallons. Fuel destroyed by Americans, 8 million gallons. Daily American consumption, 7.5 million gallons. Becker's capture at Hansfeld, 50,000 gallons. That represents 0.6% of one day's U.S. supply. The Battle of the Bulge cost 19,000 American lives and perhaps 100,000 German casualties. It exhausted the Wehrmacht's final reserves, but its lasting legacy was the realization spreading through German ranks America possessed a resource level beyond comprehension. Becker's discovery was not just about petroleum, it was about the nature of modern mechanized war. Victory belonged to whoever manufactured the most steel, aluminum, and oil. Germany never stood a chance. The final cruel irony, American salvage teams cataloging abandoned German hardware at Ligneville found 39 perfectly good tanks scrapped solely due to lack of propellant. Major Robert Harrison's report noted, fuel required, 8,000 gallons. Classification, minimal. Source, nearby reserve stores. Time needed, 4 hours. What was an impossible objective to save their premier tanks for the Germans was a minor logistical request for the Americans, something they could cover locally with reserves exceeding Kampfgruppe Becker's peak strength. This was Becker's ultimate realization at Hansfeld. Not just that America had more gasoline, but that American abundance operated on a scale that rendered German scarcity irrelevant. The war was truly over the moment American industrial potential was fully committed. Hansfeld revealed what had been true since 1942. Germany fought the insurmountable, measuring failure in single gallons, while America measured triumph in oceans. The Tiger tank rests in the Ligneville Museum today, its fuel gauge empty, a monument to the moment tactical genius met logistical reality and lost. Visitors ask why such formidable armor was surrendered. The answer? No fuel. Like and subscribe to World War II so you don't miss our next deep dive into military history.